Muy buenas.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hereby call to order hearing 12 of the 188th regular session of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. This hearing is entitled Sexual and Reproductive Rights of Girls and Women with Disabilities in Honduras. This hearing was requested by the Centro Progreseño de Atención a la Discapacidad, CAPRODI. I am Esmeralda Arosemena de Troitiño. For those of you I have not had the pleasure of meeting, I am first Vice President of the Inter-American Commission. I am also Rapporteur for the rights of children and adolescents, as well as indigenous peoples. This afternoon, I am joined by Commissioner Carlos Bernal, Country Rapporteur, and Rapporteur for the rights of persons with disabilities. We are very pleased to have him joining us at this hearing this afternoon. I am also joined by the Special Rapporteur, Javier Palomo, who is appearing for the first time at a session of the Commission. He is a Special Rapporteur for Economic, Social, Cultural, and Environmental Rights. We also have, just walking into the room at this very moment, our Assistant Executive Secretary for Monitoring and Technical Cooperation, that section of the Executive Secretariat, Maria Claudia Pulido. Thank you, Maria Claudia. We're all doing a million things at one time, so we are very pleased to be able to at least carve out this time for this hearing. I would like to express a special acknowledgement and recognition of this civil society organization who works in this area on a daily basis and is fully committed to addressing disability from using a human rights approach. We're very pleased to have you here with us. And the illustrious representatives of the state of Honduras, I would also like to extend my recognition for your work, your commitment, and for being here with us this afternoon. In these sessions, the hearings represent, and I like to point this out in each hearing, this is an opportunity for dialogue, to be able to listen to the different sides, such that the Commission, hearing from both sides, can discharge our efforts and our responsibilities to support these sides. So thank you all for being here with us this afternoon. Some of you are familiar with how these hearings work, but I would like to be explicit about how the time will be distributed. We do so in an impartial and equal way. Civil society has 20 minutes. The state has 20 minutes. We, too, have 20 minutes for our observations and requests for clarification. Then each side has 12 minutes to respond. I would also like to underscore the fact that here at this hearing, we will be discussing a matter that very particularly affects women and girls with disabilities. I would like to add that those who requested this hearing, they themselves have disabilities that require both support and a response to ensure that this hearing is inclusive. Each individual, when taking the floor, I will ask you to introduce yourselves, give us your name, the position you hold, the role you're playing in this hearing, if you represent the state, if you represent civil society, or some other type of institution. And please, each time you take the floor, please repeat your name such that any individual with a vision or hearing impairment will be able to see this virtually and understand who it is who's speaking at any given time. This hearing is being broadcast live with sign language interpretation. This is a commitment we have undertaken as the Inter-American Commission so that we are meeting just the minimum requirements for these hearings. This hearing has one very special objective. That is to present to the Commission all information necessary regarding the situation of access to and the exercise of sexual and reproductive rights in the case of girls and women with disabilities in Honduras. In many cases, these women and girls are victims of multiple forms of violence when they seek to and wish to exercise those very rights. Without further ado, I would like to offer the floor. I will first offer it to the representatives of civil society who are with us here in the room. No microphone. I am Carolina Flores, a human rights defender and part of the technical team of the Centro Progreseño de Atención a la Discapacidad, CAPRODI, defending lives, access, and dignity. This in a global context affected by conflicts, economic instability, and environmental challenges. Women and girls with disabilities in Latin America and the Caribbean are institutionally marginalized and see restricted access to healthcare services and sexual and reproductive rights due to political and ideological factors. On behalf of CAPRODI and as delegates Carolina Flores and Cristian Joel Murillo, we are deeply grateful for the opportunity to present a report during this hearing on access to sexual and reproductive rights for women and girls before the Commission during its 188th period of sessions. First, we would like to express our sincere gratitude to all persons with disabilities and their families and this broad network of support. You are the strength and resilience that push us forward as we continue to fight for inclusion and equal rights. We also extend our gratitude to all of our allies, partners, authorities, companies, media, and everyone in the global community for your ongoing support in this crucial cause. Today, in the next moments, we will share with you our perspective on the importance of protecting the sexual and reproductive rights of girls and women with disabilities. Over time, girls and women with disabilities have Good afternoon. I'm Christian Murillo, a human rights defender and civil society representative. Over history, women and girls with disabilities have been subject to psychological and physical abuse, exploitation, and abuse, no matter where, geographically speaking, custody, or even when they have been under state protection in Honduras. They have been victims of a patriarchal system which has exposed them to different types of violence that are equivalent to torture and cruel and inhumane and degrading treatment. 54% of unwanted pregnancies are among girls from ages 10 through 19. A report from the Center for Women's Rights, CDM, that was just in 2020, 23,000 women were forced to become mothers. These data force us to ask ourselves about the status of invisibility of girls and women with disabilities, or the ability to make reports about what happens to them. Significant progress has been made in terms of legislation. We must recognize that in March, the suspension of the ability to access emergency contraception. These are factors that violate women and girls' ability to access information in a timely manner or in formats that are accessible. Despite the fact that there is a protocol for assisting victims of sexual violence, medical treatment for women and girls with disabilities continues to be a challenge, which at the end of the day becomes yet another violation of their rights. We come before the Honorable Inter-American Commission of Human Rights in order to promote access to reproductive and sexual rights for women and girls with disabilities. We are seeking both justice and equity. The need to tackle this problem in the context of access to rights is imperative. Discrimination, vulnerability that women and girls with disability face in terms of sexual and reproductive rights run counter to the guidelines of the Committee on Disability and the scope of the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. According to the United Nations, women and girls with disabilities are a highly vulnerable group. Nevertheless, it is important to note that access by girls and women with disabilities to healthcare services and to be able to exercise their sexual and reproductive rights require specific support that would help improve their living standard. In Honduras, There is significant institutional weakness in terms of girls and women with disabilities access to sexual and reproductive rights. This is in both the public and private healthcare sector. This is a critical challenge that requires equitable and specialized support. The obstacle lies in the lack of infrastructure adapted to this particularly vulnerable group, the lack of physical and communicational infrastructure in healthcare centers and clinics leads to obstacles to treatment. From the perspective of bioethics, we must promote autonomy and the ability to make informed decisions as underlying principles. Women and girls with disability should have the opportunity to exercise their free will and make informed decisions about their sexuality and reproduction. Nevertheless, this is something that is made more difficult because of a lack of access to information and the lack of an effective justice system also undermines the rights of these individuals. They do not have legal recourse that allows them to assert their rights in situations of discrimination, abuse, or negligence in medical treatment. The lack of practical and legal avenues that enable them to seek reparations when their rights have been violated. The path toward an inclusive and safe society in Honduras must address the institutional weaknesses. Healthcare and the sexual and reproductive rights of women and girls should be equal for all individuals, whatever their ability, gender, sexual orientation, or age. This in order to be implementing the Convention on Persons with Disability. This should be for all individuals without exception, access to medical care and the ability to make informed decisions about their sexual and reproductive health. This requires an integrated and comprehensive approach to ensure accessibility and autonomy. Surmounting these weaknesses is essential to ensure that women and children in Honduras have the opportunity to live full autonomous lives in which their human rights are respected in the public and private healthcare systems. The historic exclusion of women has led to vacuums in health, particularly sexual and reproductive health. There are restrictive laws, a lack of access to information, stigmatization, and women and girls with disabilities are up against even more severe barriers because of their specific condition. It is essential that there be differentiated care in 5 different institutions, which we have identified in this report. First, the Health Secretariat. They must have enough budget and the elimination of all barriers, ensuring that healthcare workers are trained and have to be part of a protocol for victims of sexual violence. The Secretariat for Education, through the implementation of comprehensive sex education, they are a key actor. We also urge the national system on risk management to promote the development of policy to prevent violence against women and girls with disabilities during disasters. And in the judiciary and the prison system, there should be restorative justice using an approach that seeks to resolve conflict instead of punish, recognizing the autonomy of women and girls with disabilities. It is also essential to involve them in decision making so that they can be agents of change. This initiative is aligned with a country that is being led by the first woman president in our history. And this has to ensure human rights and promote a more just and equitable society. We can talk about certain cases. We save lives, and we can talk about women in penitentiaries. Women deprived of liberty are up against inequality and grave human rights violations. We are demanding exhaustive investigations, differentiated systems in prison, and access to comprehensive health care. We have to ensure that this happens in Honduras starting in 2023. Reproductive and sexual health are key for all women, including those who are incarcerated, particularly those who are mothers. We are demanding that the National Prison Institute and others to ensure these rights. This is even more pressing following the tragedy that we saw on June 20th. In order to guarantee women a life free from violence, we have to discuss how to save the lives of girls with disabilities in Honduras. Many of them are subject to harassment on the street, and in the case of young deaf women, we are urging policies to make sure they are treated with dignity and are included in the education system. There has to be a more just system. Together, we will eliminate barriers, eliminate street harassment, so that we can support mothers with disabilities. We have the case of Patricia, a mother with a disability who faces violence, a lack of support, and impunity. So there must be comprehensive measures in place to protect this woman and her family and others like her. There must be a safe and just environment where all women can live with dignity and without fear. The statistics are alarming in Honduras. A woman with a disability, with some sort of mental health ability, who is pregnant in Honduras, are subject time and time again to violence, in many cases by members of the military. They need medical treatment. There must be protocols to prevent the repetition of these horrors. We have the case of Anna, a young girl with a visual impairment who is facing patriarchal barriers as she seeks love and pleasure. She needs comprehensive support and accessible sex education. There must be a safe environment that is free of stigma for all women. We have Lucia, a young girl with a mental health disability, and because of her sexual orientation and her disability, she has had suicidal thoughts. She requires support. We must create a more compassionate and inclusive society for all sexual identities and orientation. In the case of Elena and Caproli's vital work in Honduras, our work is essential to ensure that persons with disabilities have access to healthcare services and emotional support. This is a call to action for the state and society so that those who work tirelessly in this, and we have the case of Amelia, who has a hearing impairment, who wants a life free of violence. All girls, whatever their disability, deserve safe and enriching education. The Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities establishes the principles, and we must ensure that these are implemented for Amelia and for all children in Honduras. respect, the promotion and guarantee of health and sexual and reproductive rights for women and girls with disabilities is not just a call for justice, it is also the need to commit to a more inclusive society so that we can achieve the SDGs and be in compliance with the Convention on Persons with Disability in Honduras. We see persistent challenges, both structural and with respect to access to sexual and reproductive rights for girls and women with disabilities. Criminalization, the level of vulnerability, as well as street harassment are activities or events that we see very easily. There must be comprehensive sex education adapted to women and girls with disabilities, as well as inclusive language assistance systems, accessible information formats, training for justice operators and healthcare workers. This requires ongoing work. The budget must be made available to them, and there should be ongoing monitoring.
Y los derechos sexuales y reproductivos están intrínsecamente relacionados, por lo que urgen protocolos de intervención, sobre todo en países como el nuestro con alta vulnerabilidad climática. Es necesario asegurar la inclusión, la accesibilidad y proteger los derechos de las mujeres privadas de libertad en los centros penitenciarios. Este informe aboga por la igualdad y el respeto de todas las niñas y mujeres con discapacidad, independientemente de su condición. Queremos que el Estado establezca bases que permitan un país con accesibilidad y seguridad para todos y todas las personas con discapacidad, especialmente aquellas niñas y mujeres.
Por ende, presentamos 3 demandas fundamentales. Primero, exigimos una inversión inmediata en la adaptación de infraestructura y servicios de salud para garantizar la accesibilidad y adecuación para las niñas y mujeres con discapacidad. Esto incluye la capacitación del personal de salud en la atención de sus necesidades específicas, promover la accesibilidad a información relevante en formatos accesibles es vital para garantizar la igualdad en el acceso a la atención médica y la toma de decisiones informadas sobre su salud sexual y reproductiva. Segundo, es imperativo que se promueva la inclusión, la educación sexual integral en los programas educativos en Honduras, con un enfoque específico en la diversidad de género y discapacidad. Exigimos la implementación de programas educativos que empoderen a niñas y mujeres con discapacidad, proporcionándoles herramientas para tomar decisiones informadas sobre su salud sexual y reproductiva. También demandamos una amplia campaña de sensibilización para conducir y combatir los estereotipos, prejuicios, capacitar a profesionales de la salud en la atención a estas necesidades específicas. Finalmente, es urgente que el sistema judicial facilite el acceso a la justicia de las niñas y mujeres con discapacidad, desarrollando protocolos de intervención, garantizando la participación igualitaria en la toma de decisiones que afectan sus derechos sexuales y reproductivos. El sistema judicial debe adoptar prácticas respetuosas de los derechos humanos y garantizar la reparación en el daño recibido. Estas demandas son un llamado a la acción para promover una vida completa y equitativa para las niñas y mujeres con discapacidad en Honduras, reconociendo que la autonomía en el ámbito sexual y reproductivo es un pilar esencial de sus derechos humanos y la educación sexual integral es un medio fundamental para empoderarlas y garantizar el acceso a una vida digna y justa. Gracias.
Muchísimas gracias por toda su información, toda su documentación presentada. Vamos a darle de inmediato la palabra a la ilustre representación del Estado de Honduras, siendo la presencia del embajador.
Muchas gracias, muchas gracias. Honorables miembros de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, distinguidos representantes, beneficiarios y beneficiarias, y peticionarios de la presente audiencia y público en general. Bienvenido, señor embajador. Le saluda Tomás Emilio Andrade Rodas, subprocurador general de la República de Honduras. El Estado de Honduras se comparece ante esta 188 Asamblea, periodo de sesiones de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, atendiendo la convocatoria a la audiencia temática sobre derechos sexuales y reproductivos de niñas y niños con discapacidad en Honduras, a la cual me acompaña una delegación interinstitucional integrada por la Procuraduría General de la República, la Secretaría de Derechos Humanos, la Secretaría de Asuntos de la Mujer y la Secretaría Social y la Secretaría de Salud. Honduras asume con gran compromiso todas las obligaciones internacionales que emanan de las convenciones en materia de derechos humanos que hemos ratificado. Igualmente, mantiene una política abierta a los mecanismos internacionales de protección de derechos humanos y es así que el Estado manifiesta su voluntad en informar y sostener diálogos francos y abiertos sobre la situación de los derechos humanos de la población hondureña, en particular sobre los derechos sexuales y reproductivos de niños, de las niñas y mujeres con discapacidad. Honorables comisionados, Honduras ha recibido las recomendaciones en materia de derechos humanos, sexuales y reproductivos por parte del Comité de Derechos Humanos y el Comité sobre los Derechos de las Personas con Discapacidad y el Comité para la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer. Estas recomendaciones formuladas al Estado constituyen una guía que instaura los mecanismos para el diseño de políticas públicas, planes, programas y proyectos para llevar a cabo en el terreno de los derechos humanos. Honorables comisionados y comisionadas, Honduras reconoce la obligación de proteger los derechos de los niños y de las niñas en sus artículos del 119 al 126 de la Constitución de la República, en los convenios y en los tratados internacionales ratificados por el Estado, garantizando el interés superior del niño y de la niña como principio jurídico rector que potencia el reconocimiento de todos sus derechos. De igual manera, Honduras forma parte de los convenios y tratados internacionales sobre derechos de las personas con discapacidad, como ser el Comité de Derechos Económicos, Sociales y Culturales y el Comité para la Eliminación de la Discriminación contra la Mujer, que han determinado que el derecho a la salud incluye la información y asesoramiento sobre planificación de la familia y la salvaguardia de la función de reproducción. El Estado reconoce la importante información derivada del diagnóstico situacional de la salud y derechos sexuales y reproductivos de las mujeres con discapacidad en el Progreso y Oro. Y toma nota de las recomendaciones orientadas a profesionales de la salud y autoridades de los centros de atención sanitaria, a operadores de justicia, al gobierno local, a las autoridades de salud y justicia social, municipal, nacional, poder judicial y todo el Estado de Honduras. Para el gobierno solidario de nuestra presidenta Xiomara Castro, tiene como prioridad garantizar los derechos sexuales y reproductivos en un compromiso derivado del plan de gobierno que destaca en su apartado número 4 hacia una Honduras solidaria, incluyente y libre de violencia. 4.1, que es salud, lo primero es vivir con calidad. En razón de ello, se trabaja en redefinir el sector salud en Honduras, fortalecer la atención primaria, renovar la infraestructura actual y creación de una red nacional de salud pública accesible para toda la población, con especial énfasis en los niños y en las niñas, mujeres y adultos mayores, y aumentar sustancialmente el presupuesto asignado en esta Secretaría de Estado. Como parte de la implementación de políticas públicas, programas y proyectos, se han adoptado medidas importantes para hacer efectivos los derechos sexuales y reproductivos bajo el principio de integralidad en las esferas del derecho a la vida, a la libertad, a la seguridad, a la salud, a la información, a la igualdad, a la educación y una vida libre de discriminación y de violencia, entre otros. Medidas que a continuación expondremos. En la esfera judicial se han implementado medidas estructurales tales como el Poder Judicial está trabajando con el Centro Electrónico de Documentación e Información Judicial para establecer criterios diferenciados por discapacidad en sus datos estadísticos. En cuanto al seguimiento de los casos de violación a los derechos a la salud sexual y reproductiva de las mujeres con discapacidad, el Ministerio Público cuenta con un módulo de atención integral especializado donde se realizan las primeras diligencias de constatación de los hechos. La representante de la Secretaría de Estado en el Despacho de Asuntos de la Mujer, la abogada Andrea Cruz. Muchas gracias.
Honorables miembros de la Comisión Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, representantes de la sociedad civil y demás público presente, en la esfera social se han implementado medidas estructurales tales como, por mandato de la Presidenta Constitucional Iris Xiomara Castro Sarmiento, en cumplimiento de las recomendaciones internacionales de organismos de protección de derechos humanos y demandas de organizaciones de mujeres y feministas, se crea mediante Decreto Ejecutivo PCM 05-2022 la Secretaría de Estado en el Despacho de Asuntos de la Mujer como órgano rector responsable de promover la justicia de género, la igualdad de derechos y oportunidades plenas para las mujeres.
Girls can denounce all acts that violate these rights. In the same year, 2022, we had the first meeting of women with disabilities in Honduras, which is the product of organizations and institutions that work pro-women and women with disabilities, along with the Department of Social Development, to reestablish the fundamental rights that our national legislation establishes to guarantee the integral security of girls and women. The Department of Women's Affairs, in one of its points, incorporates in all of its axes the perspective or the point of view on disability. The right of women to participate socially and in decision-making, the right of women and girls of a life free of violence, the right to have their sexual and reproductive rights, and this is transformational for the life of women and girls. Against violence towards women, there is another national plan, 2023 to 2033, incorporates other principles, equality and non-discrimination, and it has as a purpose that the competent institutions then should be publishing data and any types of violation of these rights against women. Some of the strategic actions that have indicators for women with disabilities that are being affected by violence. As part of this and the economic autonomy of women that survive violence, by way of a legislative decree 157/2022 that contains the general proposals of the budget, it is foreseen that there should be a gender focus from the public sphere. It also tells all municipal entities and provides budget to have programs for all access for women and human rights. And 5% should be given to prevention and violence against women from an intersectional perspective. The Secretariat has prioritized its work, such as a working group of integral reform for people with disabilities and territorial assemblies to let this new law be known. Since 2022, the government of President Iris Xiomara Castro began to have different types of audiences on gender that are led by the Legislative Commission of the Budget and Gender at the National Congress. And then this makes citizen participation and different expressions of women's movement so that they can speak. As a last point, but not less important, the Secretariat of Safety, we have another law that takes care of violence against women in the next few days. This will be a reality. In this fashion, I hand the floor to the Secretary of Social Development, Wendy Aguilar. Honorable Commissioners, Civil Society, the Secretariat of Social was created by a special statute and to have public policy and social protection of the destined to those in extreme poverty, and social policies of a solidarious Honduras and free of violence. Within this area, we are working to create a national register of people with disabilities, which depends from the General Directorate for people with disabilities that will try to obtain statistics that will allow for better management of all affairs related to disabilities in Honduras, and will provide us with disaggregated data of women and children, and will also take into the perspective of gender and disabilities. So by way of CEDESOL and Solidarias Aprueba Sol, we have provided resources to more than 164 civic society organizations to have rehabilitation processes effected within the country. Apart from this, there's also another fund for disabilities, a repository of economic research that will be used for sustainable development throughout the country, benefiting more than 40,000 people in the first year alone. And another thing has been the Association of Deaf People in Honduras has created a manual of sign language regarding gender violence, reproductive health rights. And then there is another law of development for people with disability that is made up by different members of the government and civil society that will protect the rights of people with disability. It is important to note that this new draft law includes all of this and trying to protect human reproductive and sexual reproductive rights of girls, women, and all people with disability. We also have established a group of women with disabilities that takes care of all affairs related to sexual rights and the promotion in general of women and girls with disabilities in Honduras. We also have begun to renew the public processes that we have had 2 meetings, interinstitutional meetings at high level, so that we get more information to make a diagnosis of what is the situation regarding this new public policy. From CEDESOL, we're also promoting the law of social protection, and we're working with the Department of Human Rights that is creating a bridge for all these issues to provide a more dignified life to all people. The Solidarius Network, PROASOL, are the executing bodies, and they have promoted services to families where there is 1 or more people with disability, and provide medical services, social assistance. And I pass the floor to Dr. Clara Lopez. Thank you, honorable commissioners and members of civil society and public in general. Within the health sphere, we have established structural measures. During the International Day of Women, our president and the Minister of Health approved by way of an executive decree the free use, sale of the contraceptive pill, to guarantee in that way part of women's reproductive and sexual rights. The national policy of this sexual and reproductive health then incorporates different areas to provide these rights to women with disabilities and girls with disabilities. So we will begin the process of harmonizing all of this with government priorities related to people with disabilities and the development of an implementation plan and the budget that it requires that will allow us to execute this plan. 10 months ago, we approved the integral services and protocol to people and survivors of sexual violence, and this gives emphasis to people with disabilities who are more likely to suffer this type of violence, and also to see when there is a suspicion of this type of crime committed. There are two guidelines related to sexual and reproductive health that says that the needs of women and adolescents with disabilities should be differentiated. There's a protocol also for maternal health and family planning. Regarding the 8 hospitals and services that provide service to mothers and children that is being planned by our President, Xiomara Castro, we are incorporating the design of universal access to ensure that people that have reduced mobility can have access to specialized health services. The state has a historical debt regarding the rights of girls and women with disabilities, but we are, however, making efforts to improve the quality of services with a focus on gender, human rights, and intersectionality. And I hand the floor to Natalie Roque Sandoval. Thank you. I am Natalie Roque Sandoval, Secretary of State in Human Rights for the government of Honduras. The state acknowledges that there are still challenges regarding sexual and reproductive health rights of women and girls. We have an urgent need to do away with barriers for women to exercise their sexual and human and reproductive rights. We have to assign budgets, have legal systems that take care of this, and be more sensitive and aware of the needs of this group of girls and women. It is also basic to have better coordination between the different areas involved to guarantee that these rights are protected and enforced of people with disabilities. We think that this will facilitate dialogue between civil society, the government, and mechanisms of protection of human rights, as well as showing what progress, challenges, and public policies that the country has faced. Also to reflect on what path to follow as a government whose role it is to guarantee rights. Also, we want to continue working in pro of the dignity of people, and we acknowledge the work done by people who defend the rights of girls and women with disabilities who do it every day. Thank you. Thank you very much. I would like to express our satisfaction in listening to what the different positions are within the state of Honduras regarding their proposals of different actions to be taken, and the acknowledgement that there is still a path to transit, more work to be done to maintain this communication with this reality of people with disabilities. And what brings us here today, the sexual and reproductive rights of girls and women with disabilities and the barriers or obstacles that they face in order to exercise those rights, and this could be improved. I will speak later, but right now, as the rapporteur for childhood, I would like to let the rapporteur of the country and the rapporteur for people with disabilities, Dr. Carlos Bernal, I would like to thank the colleagues of the Commission for organizing this and the representation of the state to attend or appear at this dialogue or meeting and present some of the policies that are in course to provide these rights. So I'd like to focus on something that surprises me, and that is sexual violence towards people with disabilities. It surprises me because there are three vulnerabilities that all play a part in these type of violent actions. First of all, it is towards women in a patriarchal society, so that already creates a vulnerability. Number two, these are women with disabilities. And number three, in some cases, it is girls. I was listening to the information of these violent sexual actions against girls that are 10 years old. That's very concerning. But a fourth thing that did not come up, but it is obvious, and somebody else will refer to it later, the economic vulnerability that goes hand in hand with the lack of education and knowledge of what your freedoms are and the right not to be forced into sexual encounters that women with disabilities suffer. I greatly value the information that the state has given us regarding the policies that are being created now, and this urgent 114, a place where people with disabilities can go to. But I'd like to ask a bit more, to get more detail about four things or four areas where you would need a plan to attack the root cause of that sexual violence. One, a general idea of how, even though it's very difficult to eradicate this, but how can we do justice to people with disabilities in the midst of this patriarchal society? And two, something that has not been mentioned, how to approach intrafamily violence towards women with disabilities. And number three, how to prevent sexual aggression, such as was mentioned, street harassment. And number four, how can we prevent the fact that some of these acts come from the state? What I'm trying to say is we heard cases of armed forces that commit these acts of violence, or that it happens within government institutions where you have people with disabilities. And in those situations, they're even more vulnerable. So in those four areas, how can we think, or how can you think of policies that have two one is to impede or prevent this sexual violence and aggression. But number two, the policy should also provide sexual services and that will provide justice in the sense of research of those responsible of these actions and to provide the necessary sanctions and reparation to these victims. And thirdly, and I will conclude with this, and this is the point that concerns me the most as a rapporteur, to have the truth made known. And the problem is that invisibility of people with disabilities, and even more so when you are victims of sexual aggressions. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. I will now turn things over to our special rapporteur for economic, social, and cultural and environmental rights. Thank you, Madam President. I'm pleased to be a part of this hearing. I would like to express special thanks to civil society for discussing the important intersection between many rights, including the rights to health. I would also like to thank the illustrious delegation in representation of the state. I will seek to be brief and make 3 comments. The first is a general observation pertaining primarily to a situation that is relatively complex, one faced by the state of Honduras in terms of poverty and inequality. As a result of this situation of poverty and inequality, we've seen documentation of difficulties in access to certain services. This has been subject to monitoring by my rapporteurship and the Commission as a whole. This introduces certain complexities from the outset, which the state has acknowledged, and that is very valuable. We see that you are adopting policies and taking steps toward transforming that situation. My question is, what measures are you developing to ensure that those with disabilities can exercise their right to health, particularly in the case of sexual and reproductive health? There's a need to create priority measures. We have this idea of the higher interests of the child. This is something we see in international law. It also falls under due diligence and special protection for women, girls, and adolescents. If you don't have the answers right now, perhaps you can submit them later in writing. But I'm wondering how you are grappling with a particularly complex situation to ensure that there are specific measures in place that include the perspective of children of disability and the protection of women, girls, and adolescents' rights. Yet another relevant observation for which I would appreciate further information. What measures are you putting into place? And I am sure you have begun to do this. We've heard you mention a number of different projects and programs that you are deploying nationwide. So wondering how you make these strategies nationwide, public policies, particularly access to justice, the fight against violence, access to health care, a disability perspective, a perspective that specifically focuses on young children, and then one that specifically focuses on women, girls, and adolescents. Taking a territorial approach, this is a major challenge as well. It's not just about implementing public policies to guarantee rights with indicators that note progress made. It is also important and necessary through public policy to reverse some of the setbacks and do so nationwide. I would therefore like to hear your thoughts about this. I would also like to invite the civil society organizations present here to delve deeper into these topics, which I did not hear in your presentation. I'm very interested in how the state's response is reaching all corners of the country. Thank you. I now give the floor to the Assistant Executive Secretary. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. I would first like to extend my greetings to the representatives of civil society. It is so important to have you here to discuss such an important topic. We have not had many hearings on this topic in the past. It is therefore even more relevant. I would also like to thank the representatives of the state from the Secretariat for Human Rights. We met with you during our in loco visit. I wanted to thank you for all of the information that you have shared with the leadership of Commissioner Carlos Bernal, as well as the technical team from the Rapporteurship of Persons with Disability, who are currently working on a regional report regarding the situation of persons with disability. A questionnaire was circulated. I believe more than 13 countries in the region were involved and responded, as did civil society organizations. We're looking at the cross-cutting nature of this topic, which is of the utmost importance. Thus far, the Commission's focus has been, and we continue to deepen that, is the legal capacity of persons with disabilities. We have heard you speak of different types of vulnerabilities, and Commissioner Bernal spoke to those as well. Something else I wanted to share with you, which is contained in our report on violence against women and girls. This was published by the Commission back in 2019. Chapter 2 of that report recounts some of the regional best practices being implemented. It points out some specific countries and their constitutional courts. And this is something that we heard raised by the representative civil society organization, the need to design and fund reasonable adjustments to ensure that persons with disabilities have equal access to justice, as well as training for healthcare professionals and justice operators, taking a social approach that is sensitive to the needs of persons with disabilities. One thing I find highly significant here, and this is a question that I will pose to the distinguished delegation from the state. In these programs, these projects that you are currently implementing and trying to fund and look for the budget for, have you discussed their design and development with civil society organizations? To what extent have civil society been involved in their design, particularly in the case of sexual and reproductive rights for women and girls with disabilities? So it's both a general and a specific question. Thank you very much, Madam Vice President. Thank you, Maria Claudia. I echo the comments already made by my colleagues up here at the table. As we look at the guarantee of rights, particularly for persons with disabilities, and even more specifically in the case of women and girls, I would like a clarification on two different points. Does the state currently have special education programs? It should be comprehensive education on human sexuality, sexual and reproductive rights, any sort of comprehensive sex education. And also inclusive comprehensive sex education to take into account the very specific needs of girls, women, and adolescents with disabilities. Nowadays, what is the status of such programs, educational programs? So we've heard talk about the importance of interagency cooperation. You noted that in terms of all policy development and program implementation. How is that coordination amongst agencies unfolding? In a special, it needs for children and specialized programs and projects aimed at them. So the matter of education, we've heard discussion about the situation of both poverty and exclusion, as well as discrimination that this group is the target of. Is there true coordination? Is there curriculum of this type? Civil society, the representatives provided us with statistics. I wrote down 54% of pregnancies are girls and adolescents. So violence, abuse that result in pregnancies, more than half of them are pregnancies, teen and young girl pregnancies. Tied to this is the matter of education programs, as our colleague from civil society noted. It's through education and training that we can provide the tools necessary to prepare children and youth to grapple with these types of situations and violence, which have these types of results: sexual violence that leads to forced pregnancy. I would like to know, in all of the work you're doing to develop and implement programs and plans, is there comprehensive sex education? Is that something being developed? Is it already being implemented? I am of the mind that education and training are what can help us to offer protection, and this is taken on by girls and adolescents themselves. That's one point, and then we have the entire justice system. At the end of the day, this is very much tied to the response of the justice system. Here we've heard that it's negligence, criminalization, re-victimization. My question in terms of the specialized judicial system required to tackle a problem like this, how are those who work in the system, how is their education, their preparedness assessed so that you can have the right people in place to deal with this? And I'm going to move on to the other extreme in justice system. How do you resolve these cases? Is there training there for those in the healthcare profession who need to know how to provide treatment to those with disabilities, in particular girls and adolescents? I know that these were very broad and comprehensive questions. I do believe, however, that this notion of a transformation in Honduras, inclusive Honduras, which I think is a very powerful message for persons with disabilities to come from a position of strength, talking about an inclusive Honduras. I will now give the floor to our colleagues from civil society for their comments. And I would like to underscore that all of the information and data you've provided is very important. If you could please provide it to us in writing. We've already received a copy of your report, very complete. But to address all of the questions we are raising here, if you could provide us some answers in writing post-hearing. In this process, civil society organizations echo your comments and would like to underscore some situations that we deem important. For purposes of this hearing, we would like to indicate that we somehow have to surmount the centralized system, not just in terms of addressing the issue, but also in the way budgets are set. We have to ensure that state funds reach each and every corner of the country, whether urban or rural. Or access to health care and sexual and reproductive rights for women and girls with disabilities. Another need I would like to underscore is the need to have protocols that take a differentiated approach and allow for adjustments, reasonable adjustments to be made to deal with the specific needs of each girl and each woman with disability. We are aware, we recognize the need that we have as a country to generate data and information so that decisions can be informed and made in a more timely way, and that information can be publicized far and wide. In addition to what the situation is now, we see almost a total absence of discussion of this topic. And this is of great concern to us. Lastly, we echo this proposal to work together, and I'm not speaking just on behalf of our organization, but on behalf of civil society more broadly, that we be involved in the joint preparation of protocols and policies, and that will facilitate participation and raise the profile on women and girls with disabilities, have them involved in the decision making in terms of their access to sexual and reproductive rights. There should be a diagnostic analysis. This is something that we conducted last year to shed light on the situation of sexual and reproductive rights in two different spheres. One, the public health system, and one in the judicial system. The state has a copy of those analyses, and we would be happy to provide a copy to the Commission. This could be helpful in the development of a protocol to do capacity building in both the healthcare sector and the justice sector. This initiative would also enable the state to adopt both measures and practices as part of their reforms, if they so desire. And it will help to strengthen state capabilities to allow for greater inclusion and participation by persons with disability in general, and specifically girls and women with disabilities, so that they can access in a smoother, less complicated way their rights, and particularly sexual and reproductive rights. We are grateful that the state delegation has recognized the vulnerability and the situation of marginalization that women and girls with disabilities experience in Honduras. This is an important step. There is denying this would just exacerbate the situation that these individuals face. In terms of safeguards, all persons with disabilities need first recognition. We applaud your recognition, but at the same time, we call upon the state to work hand in hand with civil society and allow us to be part of the decision-making, the development of protocols, programs, public policies. We also call upon the state to not subject us to reprisals for our work. We have experienced this in the past, particularly in the case of our institution. We thank you for the questions that each of you representing the Commission have raised. I wanted to mention reasonable adjustments and technical support for all individuals' disabilities, and to make sure that these reach every corner of the country, not just in the case of public institutions, but also private institutions, to ensure comprehensive health care to all of those in the country, because that is incumbent upon the Secretary of Health. We want to ensure that there is comprehensive sex education in each public school. We want to see effective support for all victims and survivors of violence, and particularly sexual violence. We hope that you will work with younger children to ensure that there is non-repetition of these horrors. It's important to have comprehensive protocols and as well as effective policies that will safeguard all Hondurans with disabilities. We call upon you for decent budgets that will ensure the ability to implement public policies, and that these be in line with a differentiated approach and include language adapted to each type of disability, but also based on the type of disabilities. This is something that we see. There are different levels of disabilities. How do we go beyond the medical approach and focus on an approach that includes access, decent and dignified lives, and access for all individuals? We thank you for this opportunity, but we would like to sound a call for a deeper dive into this, and we will provide responses to each of the questions raised by both the Commission and the state. Great, thank you. I am very pleased with the way that this hearing has gone. I can assure civil society of the commitment of the Commission to keep this topic as one of our priorities through all of the rapporteurships involved. I would also like to thank the state for its participation. Oh, I thought we were reaching the end of the hearing. Oh, thank you very much. The state has an opportunity to respond. We have not come to the end of our hearing yet. The state has the floor. Thank you, Madam President. I would like to begin in speaking on behalf of the state delegation to ensure you that there does not exist, nor will there ever be, reprisals against your organization or any others. We fully recognize the work that you do as human rights defenders. We also fully recognize that the ability to do everything that you should in the discharge of your activities as human rights defenders. The state would like to begin with that commitment, and now I would like to turn things over to my colleagues so that you can speak to the question raised by the Special Rapporteur on DESC about how this will reach the entire nation. Thank you, Minister. On behalf of the Secretary for Social Development, that every measure we've discussed today are not enough to provide a comprehensive response to the situation faced by women and girls with disabilities in Honduras. That being said, I wanted to emphasize that we're working to develop public policy that is specifically aimed at persons with disabilities. We will do a situational analysis and make these very participatory. There are 7 main challenges that we've identified, And these are some that were raised by the rapporteur, Carlos Bernal. This is guaranteeing accessibility, guaranteeing rights and social participation, attitudinal barriers, and that can lead to a lack of treatment and attention in both the judiciary and the medical system. We see double, sometimes triple, discrimination that women and girls with disabilities face. Also communication internally to work on public policies and partnerships that are coordinated, and to also ensure that civil society knows what the different institutions are doing and to provide assistance to persons with disabilities.
Regarding our other subject, when we took over Maracastro, there were only 2 units, municipal units in Honduras for disabilities. So we expect to have 40, of which we already have 36, where we have had the municipal corporations met already. We have to assign budgets, and they will also have their main job to take care of people with disabilities. So we are working on having this all over the country. Our goal is 60 of these units. We have 36, and we continue to make progress. Next year, we will propose a new goal so that we continue expanding these services to people with disabilities within the same challenges I mentioned before, but this time at a local level. And then the executive secretary, instead of having these things for people with disabilities, what we have now are 3 working groups where the civil society works. We have a technical, we call them tables, where for disabilities, where Christian Ure was part of that, and he has been with these processes of consultation for people with disabilities. Now we have another group of women with disabilities, and they want to promote sexual and reproductive rights, and we already had 1 meeting at and also a large fair. And we also hope to make this regional and spread it throughout the different parts of the country. And then we have the consultative, or the place where people can go and ask questions, which we intend to provide answers to all this subject. So I will let Dr. Clara Lopez have the floor now. Regarding the questions that you have, Natalie Roque Sandoval, I am the Secretary of State for Human Rights. Regarding your questions specifically of whether we have sexual education, integral sexual education being provided, it is necessary to note that we face, as a government, a great challenge here regarding the fight to obtain an integral type of education on this subject and public policies that accompany it. This is something that has become that is a great challenge for our government. And we have expressed publicly our will to initiate this, and we began there was a virulent campaign against this. So it is also related with our political identity, because our president is a woman, and she began her role as president saying she would work for sexual and human and reproductive rights. So within my powers as Secretary of State for this department, and in front of this commission, and in the general sense of human rights, we have posed our enormous concern regarding these hate campaigns and general gender violence and misogynist attacks that have been happening when we are trying to promote this sexual and reproductive rights to be part of our state. Perhaps Dr. Clara could more concretely explain what we're doing regarding this and how difficult this process was to be able to sell once again contraceptive pills, which was not allowed. Thank you, Secretary Senator. I am Clara Lopez, and on behalf of the Department of Health of Honduras, to approve the contraceptive pill was an enormous challenge because of what the Secretary of State, Natalie Roque, mentioned. However, we were able to do it, and in only 7 months, we have been able to make the pill accessible at many drugstores and pharmacies. And this year, in programming contraceptive methods for 2024-2026, we have put in our budget the purchase of contraceptive pills so we can make this law a reality. So this is a challenge that we have taken on seriously. And in the same manner, we're also trying to strengthen access to all types of contraception, mainly long-term contraception, which are the methods that we're giving priority to at the moment. Regarding sexual education, integral sexual education, from the Department of Health, we are also committed to make this progress. We do not have a law per se yet for sexual education, but all personnel in the health department is committed to provide talks, workshops to educational institutions that are within the areas that we can influence so that we can speak of priority issues that will help us combat the high amount of adolescent pregnancies that we have in the country at the moment. Thank you, Doctor. I now will hand the floor to the representative of the Department of Women. Natalie Roque. So taking into account the questions that members of the CIDH asked on how we will reach the different areas in our country, we have these municipal tables, we call them, for gender issues, and they are committed to institute and create the mechanisms so that we can guarantee the protection of girls and women within these municipalities. To reaffirm the commitment of incorporating into civil society all these gender meetings that we're having and we're promoting from the government, and we there we have representatives of women, human rights, and feminists, so that we can provide a gender focus to these meetings of information, these audiences. And this has also been socialized at in different areas, has been done in different areas, so that for the first time we can have a chapter that includes all groups so that we can provide some progress in the rights of women and girls. Thank you, Minister. As has become quite clear, the state commits to continue working for the rights of people with disability, and in that sense, we are also committed to articulate at an institutional level with civil society and all interested parties that have to do with the rights and access to justice of all Hondurans that want to comply with the law and improve everything that has not been handled in an ideal way until now. So we will provide to the IACHR Secretariat any information that is relevant or important so that we can create the country we all wish for. Thank you very much. And I think now it is the right time. I just want to make one comment, and that is on the educational processes or sexual education. And this integral sexual education is something that the Commission has been analyzing and evaluating so that we can provide the states an idea of what this implies precisely in ensuring all these rights. So we are working on this that would be useful and perhaps provide some answers that we do acknowledge sometimes is difficult for some of the states. So reparations, I know, is another important point, and the response for reparations of all situations of victims and the importance that that has in their life. And I believe that in these responses, our exchange here has let us know that there is a way, and this way of articulation with civil society, so we can work this in a complete manner. Thank you very much, and this audience has concluded.